here we are with the timely scientific insight in our broadcast. The focus tonight is very special because we are talking about a disease that is very prevalent here in Italy. We are talking about hepatitis B. So I immediately ask our Adriano Panzironi, tell us about the prevalence of this disease in our nation.
The latest data tell us precisely that 600,000 people in Italy today have the problem of chronic hepatitis, and every year we have 6,000 new cases, even if in reality only 600 are diagnosed, because 1 in 10 people realize precisely that they have this virus. Let's say that in the last 20 years there has been a major reduction in new cases of infection, and that certainly is a very positive thing.
And in your opinion, what precisely is the reason for this decrease in the last 20 years of cases of infection of the disease?
Certainly, it depends on the fact that today there is much more attention in the sterilization of surgical instruments that are always used by dentists, but also of those devices that are also used to do tattoos. Because unfortunately, this virus is very resistant, so you really have to do a very effective sterilization. So certainly a lot depends on that. Then certainly there also depends on the fact that 20 years ago, they started to give a vaccination to newborns and also to people, to relatives who had precisely at home a person with this pathology. And certainly this helped in the reduction of new cases.
Can we say that for this disease, vaccination has a valid reason?
Yes, you know what I think about vaccines. Vaccines can indeed be a valid tool. The problem, if anything, is how we do them and whether before we do these vaccines, we say we make an effort to carry out what is a pre-vaccinal assessment, because precisely the alteration of the immune system can lead at the time we do a vaccine to an even more serious alteration of this immune system and then have very serious side effects. If you are careful about that, certainly the vaccine can be a very good tool.
Mr. Panzironi, as you know, the Health Seeker program is an in-depth program and an information program, and therefore the editors chose this video just to make us understand and explain how the HPV virus acts. Let's see it.
The hepatitis B virus infects humans. And not only humans, because it is able to infect chimpanzees as well, and it does it with a very skillful strategy. It is able to penetrate the liver cell by leaning on a receptor, a kind of albumin-like lock, and once it enters, it strips itself of what is its outer protein coat and exhibits its DNA inside the nucleus of our liver cell, and able to integrate its DNA with our DNA. From then on, it starts an assembly line in which the virus is able to replicate copies of itself and infect new liver cells. And to do so, it also uses a strategy, that of forming incomplete copies of itself, that by distracting our immune system, leave the door open for the complete copies provided with DNA to infect precisely new liver cells.
It's really peculiar about this virus because from what I understand from the video, the virus comes in contact with our blood, then reaches the liver and uses hepatocytes to survive and replicate.
Yes, I must say it is really fascinating to hear how precisely nature has given these extraordinary abilities to the virus to be able to survive in a hostile environment and also to replicate. In detail, practically, this virus is obviously not a well-defined cell, as it could be, for example, a bacterium, but it is only its nucleus, and then it comes in contact with the hepatocyte, in this case for hepatitis, and it strips itself of its protein coat, and it basically injects itself with DNA inside the cell cytosol, which reaches the nucleus of the cell and in fact fuses with the cellular DNA. This leads to basically controlling the cell, and the cell at that point just starts to produce as if it were a factory of copies of precisely the virus itself.
But having said that, though, it is really very fascinating that nature has obviously endowed this organism with this particular action. But as you always say, nature is perfect. We are perfect. So surely we would have a weapon to be able to counteract the virus.
But of course, nature always allows for a balance, so that in the face of such incredible efficiency of the virus, however, we have an equally efficient immune system, somewhat like we have to look at the balance between the hunter and the prey. There must always be a chance for the prey to survive. Otherwise, we will have first the extinction of the prey and then the extinction of the hunter. And so even in the field of viruses, actually the virus can coexist with our metabolism without going so far as to kill us.
From what you are telling us, so between the virus and the beings who are infected by it, there is a kind of balance of this thing. However, then at this point, there is definitely something that helps us pray not to succumb.
Nature even gives us the opportunity where we encounter even more aggressive viruses to make up for those deficiencies, and the viruses become more and more aggressive. So it's a chase to achieve this balance. Actually, we have such an efficient immune system that is able to resolve virtually any viral infection. In short, the very serious ones, however, I have to say that the moment we find, as in the case of hepatitis B, instead of getting to the point where this becomes a chronic infection and then bring liver problems, then we have to ask ourselves what has happened to our immune system to such an extent that it is not so efficient.
Here you introduce just one important thing about hepatitis B, chronicity. And just for that, to understand it better, we have a video to show our audience. Let's see it together.
The incubation period theoretically varies between 1 month and 6 months. The disease manifests itself acutely when we are faced with the adolescent subject, and then in the adult population giving jaundice and nausea. But in these cases, the disease chronicizes very hardly. We are faced with a chronicization rate of 5–10% and vice versa. In the young child, on the other hand, and in the newborn, the probability of chronicization of 90%, and the symptomatology is very mild or sometimes inapparent.
Here he is. This was basically Dr. Coletta, and that he confirmed to us that practically only 5 to 10% then of the infection turns chronic practically. So I wanted to ask you though, do all people who are infected then become sick?
This video explained to us very well that actually only 10% of the people who get infected get to a chronic phase, while the others definitely have an acute phase, but the body responds and is able to properly counteract the virus, and then you recover. So as we were saying before, we have to ask ourselves what happens to our immune system to such an extent that it prevents it from resolving this infection of the virus, and then actually leads to chronicity, and then to all the related diseases such as precisely cirrhosis, such as precisely liver cancer, and whatever else due to precisely this presence of the virus.
Your thinking is certainly very reasonable, but I want to ask you, do you know practically the process of how official medicine, you call it protocol medicine, deals with this disease?
It doesn't really pose the problem at all because it becomes chronic. It simply tries to deal with the problem when it happens, and they do that. Obviously, those that are the drugs that are available to medicine today. So we are talking about the antivirals that allow you to prevent the replication of the virus, or other drugs that go to stimulate with interference the immune system to try precisely to wake it up. But this, we know, does not solve the problem. It procrastinates the pathology. And if anything, these drugs become very difficult to carry on for several years because they have side effects that are also important.
Certainly, you know, you are a little bit, indeed, maybe a little bit very critical of the official medicine. However, through your books, especially the last one, Living to 120 Research, you are bringing to light to the public, to the general public, the researchers, the scientists, and their research. And so it is definitely a very important thing. He has found something particular about hepatitis B that shows that how it is addressed by official medicine. There is definitely something different from the scientists, from the researchers. Basically, he has found research that is different from the addressing of hepatitis B by official medicine.
As you correctly said, I am against that protocol medicine, that medicine of rules of drugs at all costs, that absolutely engulfs medicine and does not give space to those researchers who instead are obviously the most pulsating part, the most alive part of research and science, and therefore also of medicine. I certainly found an Italian scientist, a doctor named Carlo Ferrari, who made instead a different protocol because he understood that indeed there is a problem in our immune system in people who suffer from this disease. And precisely, I brought it to show it to our audience.
So I asked the director to show this video that brought us on Professor Carlo Ferrari.
We have found that T lymphocytes, which are the most important immune system cells, I would say, in antiviral protection in patients with chronic infection, are severely impaired energetically and metabolically. And most importantly, we have discovered with extremely advanced techniques that it is mainly certain cellular components, namely the mitochondria, that are strongly altered in their gene expression and that condition this situation of energetic and functional alteration of the cell. What is perhaps even more important, we have also identified strategies of functional correction of mitochondria based on drugs, antioxidant drugs, which however have the peculiarity of acting specifically at the level of mitochondria.
Panzironi certainly is a very important discovery from a different point of view than running after the virus.
A different approach, because precisely this scientist has reasoned differently from what doctors usually do. That is, they do not go chasing after the problem, but try to understand it. In this case, he understood that actually in all the people who had this disease, there was a difficulty of the lymphocytes in killing the viruses, and he verified by going and looking inside with the microscope that all these lymphocytes were basically dormant because the mitochondria, that are the energy factory of the cell, were not functioning properly, and thus preventing the lymphocytes from having that energy necessary to fight precisely the hepatitis B virus. It's kind of like, if we want to give an example, let's imagine a city where there are thieves running around the streets and all the carabinieri and all the policemen suddenly found themselves without gasoline in the car.
Look, Panzironi, though, I can't help but notice that the professor in the video was talking about specific antioxidants that reactivated the mitochondria, since we were forbidden to talk about supplementation. So I'm not asking you the question that would be obligatory to ask you. I'm asking you another question, though. I'm asking you, why is there a reason why the mitochondria of these lymphocytes are so malfunctioning?
The reason is very simple, because the diet that we do damages our mitochondria, and therefore also damages the mitochondria of the lymphocytes. So let's talk about the usual Mediterranean diet, consisting of those basic foods such as bread, pasta, pizza, potatoes, rice, legumes, corn, that actually destroy our mitochondria, make them inefficient, and therefore in this case prevent the lymphocytes from being efficient enough.
Mr. Panzironi said something a bit complex. However, he was really very good at creating a tutorial to exemplify everything he just told us. So I asked the director to air the tutorial that Mr. Panzironi prepared. Let's see it.
The immune cells involved in counteracting infection with the hepatitis B virus, called HBV, are CD8 lymphocytes. When CD8 lymphocytes encounter HBV, they increase GLUT1 activity, increasing glucose uptake within the lymphocyte's cell cytosol. This leads to an increase in the energetic process of glycolysis, which not only generates energetic ATP but also produces lactate, which is converted to acetyl-CoA and fed into the mitochondria, where more energetic ATP will be generated. In people with hepatitis B, smaller mitochondria and fewer links to the endoplasmic reticulum are found. This is due to a diet rich in sugars, which increases the assimilation of glucose by lymphocytes, and an accumulation of waste, called lactate, which damages the mitochondria. In addition, a diet rich in sugar activates insulin, which reduces the activity of sirtuins that promote mitochondria repair and growth, and this causes a reduction in the energy production of the CD8 lymphocyte and the inability to perform the task of HBV elimination. When this happens, the virus is free to proliferate undisturbed, colonizing hepatocytes and inducing alteration of liver tissue, which may become fibrotic and induce liver failure, cirrhosis, or hepatocarcinoma.
Here it is. It was really very clear with this tutorial. However, I understand a kind of paradox. I explained to you why lymphocytes, basically CD8 lymphocytes, when they then encounter the virus, they do increase glucose assimilation. However, as you say, just the excess of sugar damages the energy plants of these lymphocytes. It's a bit of a paradox.
Yes, it is a paradox, a bit like what happens in Alzheimer's as well. We don't know that neuronal cells in the brain need sugar, but its excess leads to degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and like dementia. In the same case, when the lymphocyte encounters a virus, it just increases the activity of GLUT1, which is a gateway that gets glucose inside the lymphocyte. There you have an activation of glycolysis. So this form of energy position, you produce an ATP, but also lactate or acidic wastes. This acidic waste is then used by the mitochondrion to produce other energy, and then this summation of the energy from glycolysis. And the mitochondrion leads to the correct amount of energy in the lymphocyte. The problem is that when we eat a nice plate of pasta, we have this surge in blood glucose. And let's say we put through GLUT1 a significant amount of glucose into the lymphocyte when, however, he doesn't need to be that active. So he basically becomes hyperactive initially.
Here, it is lymphocyte. It is lymphocyte. However, what happens when it is basically forced to ingest sugars?
It happens that the moment we have glycolysis starting to work, we have on the other side the need to have very efficient mitochondria that can utilize this acid waste and then produce other energies. The problem is that if the lymphocyte, however, is not facing a virus, it practically does not activate a whole series of metabolic actions within the lymphocyte that serves precisely to increase the size of the mitochondria and the number, and even bind the endoplasmic reticule, which is a high organelle that allows more energy production just from those lactate wastes. On the other hand, when we have a mitochondrion that is damaged because it is practically not functioning properly, we have a buildup of this lactate that leads to further damage always to the mitochondria. To this, then, we have to add the action of insulin that starts every time we eat a nice plate of insulin carbohydrates. And the insulin goes to block the production of sirtuins, which are those cellular enzymes that are critical for the cell to recognize damaged mitochondria and also stimulate the growth of new mitochondria. From here, you get mitochondrial dysfunction, increased production of free radicals, and this leads to further damage. That's why the professor we saw, Carlo Rossi, is able to get results, because he puts in of the blood antioxidants that go to prevent the destruction of the mitochondrion because of its dysfunction, and then he gets partial success precisely against hepatitis B.
Really very clear. I thank you for these explanations, Mr. Panzironi. And now we have a very important moment of the in-depth science, because after the theory, let's call it that, we have the practice. Because at this point in the broadcast, we have a guest coming to tell us how he solved the pathology we were talking about. And that's exactly why I want to call Mrs. Carmela Mangano from Palermo here in the studio. Good evening, Mrs. Carmela. Please have a seat. So, Mrs. Carmela, you are here because you are coming to tell us that you got sick with hepatitis B? How did this start? How did you find out about this disease? Because I know there were some problems in the beginning with just high transaminases.
Yes, this pathology unfortunately is very silent. So it doesn't give problems in the beginning, let's say problems like particular pains or whatnot. It doesn't give you anything. The only thing is to be lucky enough to have timely checkups and try to figure out what's wrong. In my case, the transaminases were not going.
You had them slightly high, and that was from about what period?
15 years ago.
So since 2005?
Yes.
Since 2005?
These transaminases were being monitored by the various doctors where I went, rightly so. And all the way up to 2010. That by doing an ultrasound, the sonographer noticed that my liver was beginning to lose its homogeneity. So the edges of the liver were beginning to become uneven. Yes. So he alerted me. He said, go run now. Don't waste any more time on it. do thorough research because there is something seriously wrong with the liver. At that point, I finally made up my mind. I contacted a hepatologist at the hospital where I live, and they admitted me and did the biopsy. Of course, they did all the tests of looking for the virus, rightly so. The B virus was found. And in the liver, I was found by biopsy to have level 4 fibrosis, stage 4 level fibrosis.
So they found that you had this level 4 fibrosis. I wanted to ask you, how did the doctors act? How did they treat you when they saw that you still had this kind of virus, this kind of pathology?
How did they treat me? There is no treatment. There is simply take the antiviral or better. The doctor told me that in these cases, they take a therapy, a protocol of interferon, together with something else. But in my case, it was not even possible to adopt this protocol because I, having fibromyalgia, depression, everything I had was harming me more because interferon is strong.
Very strong, of course. I mean, do you remember how much, in spite of these treatments, how high your blood viremia was?
Very high, very high. Millions of copies were mentioned. So the damage was already there. It had to be stopped.
Stopped, sure. And the specific liver tests instead, as far as they were, do you remember them? Maybe what kind of tests were you doing? I don't know, GOTE, ALT?
Yes, these were out of the norm. They were out of the optimal ranges. They were going out. So my doctor told me that they could only help me with the antiviral. And because the antiviral doesn't make it replicate, it puts it to sleep. So the fibrosis doesn't go on.
So basically, you were having problems with high transaminases, then you found out you had hepatitis B, eventually doing treatments as well. They diagnosed you that obviously the disease had progressed and this had come in, fibrosis at a 4th stage. Then at some point you met Life 120. I see you are smiling. At that point you met Life 120.
Met Life 120 changed my life.
Then, tell us first of all how you discovered Life 120.
Of course, I learned about the show through the 61 channel, the Life channel. But that night, because I also suffer from insomnia, having fibromyalgia, I found on the Health Seeker the episode on fibromyalgia. I stopped there and it all started from there. I didn't know that. Then I got to the point where I had these results on hepatitis. So I left for fibromyalgia. I put Life 120 into practice because I listened, I informed myself, I saw the revised, the Health Seeker testimonies of people who, like me, suffered from this condition of fibromyalgia, and I began to follow you.
How long ago did it happen, Mom?
January 2018. Yes.
So basically in about 10 months.
I started to follow, however, I put it into practice the 1st of March because first I got the book, I read, I inquired, awareness.
Of course, but it has become conscious, as our Adriano Panzironi always says. Important this. So you started in March, so as I said, 10 months, and then you also redid the viremia, sure. And one very particular thing happened that I would like you to tell our viewers about. After 10 months, you do the viremia check, and what happens?
I didn't want to check right away. I didn't want to test right away. I wanted to wait. I wanted to do at least my 8 months of Life 120 because I hoped, because I could see that the pathologies I had were beginning to resolve anyway. However, when I was due for my hepatology checkup on January 7, I had to get the test to take them to the hospital to my doctor. So I did them in early November. The results were given to me in early December. and we were on the eve of the Immaculate Conception. My husband goes to pick up the analysis, and I look for the result. I saw the wonderful analysis. There is nothing.
Beautiful to hang on the wall.
I feel like crying. There wasn't even an asterisk. I had a lot of asterisks. I also had anemia. Then I was looking for that famous little number that was viremia, which for 10 years had always appeared stable, steady, and it wasn't there. How was it not there? Wasn't there, and I thought they got the analysis wrong. Since it takes almost 30 days to do these analyses to see replication, I was desperate, and my husband was asking why he was doing that. I was so desperate that I did not read that sentence. Undosed viremia. That point, my husband said, but it says something.
So the line was there. It was not what she expected, though.
Yes, because I always saw that little number. It was incurable. There was no way to cure. So not seeing the little number, I worried that they hadn't done the analysis instead, the non-dosable viremia.
And so she became more concerned.
I did worry, however, I had sensed something.
Why? And what did you do? Tell us.
I being informed that with Life 120, the immune system refortifies
becomes stronger.
itself. And so I said to my husband, now let's call the attending physician. It was 9 o'clock in the evening, eve of Immaculate. And my husband said, never mind, let's disturb. No. I said, I want to know from a doctor what the non-dosable viremia means, even though I had already guessed. I call the attending physician, and he tells me there is no virus, and there is no virus. But that was not enough for me.
Here you were not paid, so you wanted to go again.
So I called a doctor friend who works in a hospital and asked. I say, I did this analysis, but I don't really understand. You make me understand what viremia not dosable means. He told me it's not there. The virus is so insignificant that it is not even dosed. It is not found. They can't dose it. So I said, but how is that possible? I said to him, but how is it possible if in 10 years it was always 22 million copies, now it's not there anymore. He says, and how is that possible? What have you done? Did you do something? I said, but I changed my diet. And that's it. He says, then it can
be this feeding. But you, at that point, I think this communication really made you very happy. What did you do?
I exploded, of course, between crying, laughing, whatever, hugging my husband and whatever else. I was invited by my brother to the apartment next door. And that all the guests were there. We were about 30 people, so mine, his. And I came in with the test in my hand because of course, all of them were against it, and they were waiting for these tests. The cholesterol, the triglycerides, they were the things,
they were opposed to Life 120.
That the tests were out of whack, that the creatinine was starting, and instead the creatinine is beautiful. And that they didn't know this beautiful thing, though, so I started screaming, I'm cured. There's no more virus. There's no more viremia. They looked at me. They didn't understand.
Did you understand that I am cured? Then now there was my brother next to me. I grabbed him by the face. I squeezed it tightly. I said, John, Life 120 works. Do you understand that I am cured?
Wrong. The family had to reconsider both the tests that were all perfect and this fact that the virus was not there.
Is that there was not, they are put on Life 120 from the next day, from the day of the Immaculate. You made a mistake. Wait, maybe a little bit. Yes, there
to
are
us,
4,
we were
5,
very pleased, obviously, to be able to talk to you. I know you redid the liver test. How is this liver?
The liver is fine. It's all stopped there. The ultrasound found right away. There is no more all that fermentation, all that problem that prevented him from seeing the organs well. 5 minutes, he used to put half an hour, and then 5 minutes, he saw everything. He saw everything perfect. He also told him what I was doing. He said, "Brava, continue."
Mrs. Carmela Mangano also lost 15 kilos, and she told me something very beautiful, that she finds herself in the body of when she was a girl. And with this smile, we are very happy to thank you for being here this evening with us.